Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So in 2008, I think the spirit that brought me into that great experiment was a desire to be found again by the place that I live, and claimed again, or sort of reclaimed by the place that I live. And I just want to draw attention to the one image that's going to be here. I have lots of images, and I thought about sharing the images, but I decided that I'm not going to do that tonight. We're just going to have the map, and this is just a digital image of the map that hangs on my office wall. And I'll tell you a little bit about it, orient you to the circle a bit. When I stumbled on this idea, and it really was stumbling on it at a point where I had kind of given up almost, finding any way through this this tangle of commitments and ways in which my life, our lives, our shared lives are wrapped up in high carbon activities, high carbon ways of moving about. One morning when I was having breakfast with a friend, it just sort of came to me from somewhere, as these ideas sometimes do when you least expect, that maybe it would be really interesting and audacious if I didn't get in a car for a year. And actually, Doug and Larry are here. They were the ones I was having breakfast with when I had that idea, and we kind of played with it. And then I started to think, well, okay, and what if I stayed for a year within walking distance of home, say 50 miles? Maybe that would be kind of a cool thing to try to do. And it was one of those ideas that just took hold of me and would not let me go. And what really closed the deal was when I went home and I drew a circle on a map with my home on Whidbey Island at the center with a radius of 50 miles. And I noticed that the circle almost took in the whole Puget Sound Basin, but not quite. So I stretched the circle out another 10 miles and to 61, 2 miles, something like that, which turned out to be exactly 100 kilometers. And at that point, I noticed some really interesting, kind of wild things. I noticed, for example, that from my house on South Whidbey Island in the Maxwell Valley, the distance from my house to the summit of Mount Olympus was 100 kilometers. The summit of Mount Baker, 100 kilometers. Summit of Glacier Peak, I'm not kidding, 100 kilometers. Stevens Pass, Snoqualmie Pass, 100 kilometers. Go figure. And as you might notice, you draw that circle and it just touches the southern tip of Puget Sound. It just takes in the San Juan Islands. So when I made that discovery, it was all over. There was no turning back. Literally, I mean, it was from then on. I couldn't wait to get started. And it turned out that it took me the better part of a year to kind of set the table for it, to take care of the commitments I had already on the books to travel outside the region, to convince my wife that I wasn't completely crazy, to and also to begin to imagine what would be the coolest bunch of trips and explorations that I could come up with to do in the course of the year. So I allowed myself to used public transportation, and I did as much work, kept as much work going as I could during the year that was local, that was within the circle. But I had to treat the year kind of as a self-styled sabbatical. And during that time, I did not get in a car. I used public transportation for a lot of my day-to-day stuff, but I also kind of built into each month a week or more of exploration under my own power around the Puget Sound Basin. So, for example, I took a 130-mile walking trip through the Skagit Basin and down Whidbey Island. All of these red lines are bicycle trips that I took to every part of the Puget Sound Basin that I could get to. The blue, that's all sea kayaking. And the one time I left my circle, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, was to go to witness a coastwide native canoe rendezvous that was happening in Cowichan Bay on Vancouver Island. My daughter Kristen and my friends Robin and Jay went on that trip with me. They're all here. And that was 100 miles in each direction by kayak from South Whidbey to get there and back. I climbed Mount Baker from home to summit under my own power, which was, or attempted to climb Mount Baker, I should say. So those were the kinds of adventures that I had. And what I'd like to do now is do a few readings from the book and then enjoy some conversation and some questions. So behind everything I was doing during the course of the year was my underlying commitment, my motivation to really respond as directly as I could to my concern about climate change. But that was kind of, the book is not about climate change. It's not another scientific treatise. It's a book that I wrote, as I say in the introduction, for people who, like me, already accept the reality of climate change and our human role in causing it, but don't know what to do. Which described me, and in many ways still does. So I divide the book into three parts that I call the boot, the spoke, and the paddle. I want to read the epigraph to section 1, the boot, a quote from Gary Snyder from The Practice of the Wild. He says, "Walking is the great adventure, the first meditation, a practice of hardiness and soul primary to humankind. Walking is the exact balance of spirit and humility. Out walking, one notices ecology on the level where it counts." So my first chapter that I call Footloose in the Geography of Nowhere. I discovered that it's not going to be necessarily quite so easy. Taking a long walk through very settled areas and through a lot of sprawl, a lot of generic sprawl. The first morning on the first trip in January, when I took off from my house, for the first time I've ever walked the 4 miles from my house to the ferry. Happened to be pouring rain, actually a little bit of snow and sleet mixed in. The first mile takes me along familiar trails and side roads, but as I head out toward the highway, with the added weight of a full backpack, I begin to feel like an alien in my own home. I climb the long, steep hill from Maxwellton Valley to the ridge above Cultus Bay, and soon my sweat has joined with the drenching rain that is already seeping down inside my rain gear. By the time I turn the corner onto the highway itself, my boots are soaked through to the socks. I consider aborting the mission and trying again tomorrow. As I plod along